Millions of people, faith is a profound source of peace and stability. But for a silent, struggling demographic, the exact opposite is true. Practicing their religion brings them absolute terror, endless stress, and total exhaustion. This condition actually has a specific clinical and spiritual diagnosis, Waswas al-Qahri, widely known today as religious OCD. It is an intense, involuntary compulsion that latches directly onto a believer's daily routines. The physical toll is immense. You will see individuals stand up to pray, only to abruptly break their prayer to start over. They will walk back to the sink, redoing their ablutions and washing their hands until the skin is practically rubbed raw. The psychological distortion driving this loop is devastating. The sufferer genuinely believes their worship isn't good enough and that they are actively failing God. They mistake this paralyzing, rigid demand for perfection as actual piety. Shaitan, the spiritual force of whispers and doubts, knows exactly where to exploit a pious person. By weaponizing a believer's sincere desire to be good, these doubts induce so much overwhelming anxiety that the person might eventually abandon their faith entirely just to find some mental quiet. This extreme religious rigidity does not come from strong faith. It is a dangerous psychological trap designed to use a believer's best intentions against them. This obsession doesn't strike randomly. It systematically dismantles a Muslim's daily life across 3 specific battlegrounds, starting with ibadah, or acts of worship. A common trigger is applying massive quotas to daily prayers. If you tell an already anxious mind that they must repeat a specific phrase 10,000 times, missing a single count induces sheer panic. The act of remembrance becomes a source of dread rather than a spiritual connection. That brings us to the second battleground, tahara, the concept of physical purity. In a mind dealing with Waswas al-Qahri, this mutates into an irrational, phobic fear of contamination. The behavioral consequences are extreme. A person might refuse to sit on normal furniture, terrified of invisible germs. They might be driving a car, notice a tiny, unidentifiable drop of water on their shirt, and panic so intensely about cleaning it off that they risk causing an actual traffic accident. The false premise driving this panic is the illusion that true religious purity requires a clinical, hospital-grade level of sterility. Demanding that level of hyperpurity destroys the intended purpose of worship. Instead of building a bridge to God, it builds an impenetrable wall of stress. The third battleground is the most internal and often the most painful. It attacks aqidah, or core belief, moving past physical actions to strike directly at an individual's identity. Here, the sufferer experiences an overwhelming, irrational dread that a random, everyday intrusive thought has caused them to accidentally commit apostasy and fall completely out of Islam. To cope, they develop desperate compulsions. Some people will compulsively repeat the Shahada, the Islamic declaration of faith, up to 100 times a day, frantically trying to re-enter the religion over and over again. The psychological weight of this state is crushing. The individual becomes convinced they are inherently cursed or doomed, entirely rejecting the possibility that God has already forgiven them. Across worship, purity, and belief, the core mechanism is identical. The mind is demanding a flawless mathematical certainty from itself that the religion actually never asked for. Overcoming religious OCD requires an intellectual shift. The cure is the acquisition of fiqh, the practical knowledge of Islamic jurisprudence. Look at this arid, rocky desert landscape. This is the exact environment where Islamic law was revealed and practiced by the earliest Muslims, the Sahaba. Notice the dust, the ground, and the rugged simplicity of survival in this vintage desert tent. They did not have modern infrastructure. There was no endless running water, no sanitizers, and absolutely no sterile tiled bathrooms. The earliest Muslims purified themselves using stones and limited rations of water out of sheer necessity. Contrast that reality with a modern sufferer wasting gallons of clean tap water because they don't feel entirely clean. If Islamic law was perfected for people living in dust under severe water scarcity, It is intellectually impossible for that exact same law to demand clinical sterility from believers today. This legal principle kills obsessive thoughts. Doubt does not break certainty. Tiny particles of doubt bounce off the massive block of established certainty. If you are certain you performed ablution, random doubts later simply fade away. They do not invalidate your purity. Fiqh clears away the fear-based myths that plague so many people. It confirms that incidental things like having long nails, getting dirt on your hands, or experiencing a bad thought do not break a state of physical purity. Parents must proactively teach fiqh al-tahara, the practical rules of purity, to their children early on. Grounding them in these simple rules inoculates them against paralyzing psychological traps later in life. True religious knowledge delivers immense flexibility and relief. Dismantling the rigid trap of perfectionism allows you to finally reclaim the peace that faith was originally designed to provide.